Some stories begin with a bang, but this one, it starts with silence and an old man no one dared talk to. They called him Walt McRae, 62, widowed, fisherman by trade, loner by choice. If you ever drove down US Route 101 in the fall of 1987, you might have seen him. A shadowy figure beneath the Yaquina Bay Bridge, head down, pipe in mouth, surrounded by rusted crab traps and peeling paint. To the folks in Newport, Oregon, Walt wasn't exactly known for his warmth. He didn't smile at neighbors, didn't show up for church socials, and he sure as hell didn't like kids snooping around his boat. They said his heart had long since dried up, salted over by years of grief, tides, and losses no one dared ask about. And yet, that same man would become the unlikely guardian of a creature so small, so fragile, it could curl up in a rain boot and disappear. But we're not there yet. First, picture this. It's October. The coastal wind bites sharper than usual. Pumpkins sit forgotten on porches, and the smell of brine lingers in every thread of your coat. The tourist crowds are gone. Just the locals now, the sea, and the stories it carries. Walt, as usual, was doing what he did best, avoiding people hauling traps and cursing the cold. He'd park his battered green skiff under the far end of the bridge, away from prying eyes. Same spot every day, like clockwork. To most, that part of the bay was nothing but fog and forgotten boats. But that's where it happened. That's where he saw it. At first, he thought it was driftwood, just another clump of sea junk bobbing near a piling. But then it moved. Not fast, just enough. A ripple, a paw, then the softest, most helpless cry Walt had ever heard in his life. He squinted through the mist. There it was, a sea otter pup, barely a few weeks old, tangled in nylon netting, paddling weakly, half submerged, eyes wide with panic and exhaustion. And for a long moment, Walt just stood there, watching. The man who hadn't spoken a kind word in years, who once told a Girl Scout to beat it for knocking on his door. He stared at that helpless little ball of fur and cursed under his breath. He muttered, reaching for the boat hook. He didn't know it then, but that single gesture, that reluctant reach into the water, wasn't just about saving an otter. It was the first crack in a wall he'd spent a lifetime building. Because life has a funny way of sneaking up on you, especially when you've spent years hiding from it. And sometimes, the thing that changes you is small enough to fit in your hands, and wild enough to remind you what it means to feel again. This is the story of Walt McCrae, and the otter beneath the bridge, and how one man's hardened heart found something worth holding on to. Before the tide rolled out for good, Walt McCrae didn't believe in signs, not in omens, not in fate, and especially not in anything that came floating downriver tangled in a net. But there he was, half crouched in his boat, grumbling as he reached the gaff toward the shivering bundle caught against the concrete pylon. Walt McCrae, damn fool creature, he muttered, but his hands moved with care. The otter pup wasn't much to look at, soaked, sea-slimed and trembling. Its whiskers were bent, one eye crusted shut. Nylon fishing line bound around its torso like a cruel ribbon. He lifted it gently, laying it across a ragged towel in the bow of his skiff. It didn't fight him, didn't squeak, just lay there, blinking slowly, like it didn't expect to be saved. Walt didn't know what to do with it. He stared at the little body for a long moment before pulling the throttle and heading back to shore. The Marine Center was a two-room shack run by a retired biology teacher and a teenage volunteer with pink. Walt marched in like he was returning a stolen item. Walt McCrae, found this by the bridge. Ain't mine. Don't want it. The girl blinked. The older woman frowned. The center was full. No more room for rescues. Older woman, we can't take him right now, Mr. McCrae, the woman said kindly. Older woman, he's young, he needs warmth, food, just a few days, please. He didn't say yes. He just walked out, otter and towel bundled in the crook of one arm, grumbling all the way back to the dock. He cleared out a storage crate near his shack and lined it with burlap sacks. Set down a bowl of water, a piece of thawed fish, dropped the otter in like a man setting down a problem. He told it flatly. The pup rolled over once, settled in the corner, and fell asleep. And for a man who claimed he didn't care, Walt found himself watching, for hours. He noticed the tiny rise and fall of the otter's ribs, the twitch of its paw when it dreamed, the way it curled in tight, like it was trying to make itself disappear. The next morning, he brought fish before his coffee. No one saw. He made sure of that. But word travels in a small town faster than any tide. Kids started riding their bikes down the dock, asking if it was true. The Otter, the one under the bridge, Walt barked at them to leave. But one little girl peered into the crate and whispered, "Little girl, he's beautiful." The name stuck, buoy, small, floating, lost, but not gone. Walt didn't smile, but he didn't send them away either. That was the moment, the start. Not a declaration, not a vow, just an old man and a wet otter and a flicker of something that felt dangerously close to care. Because sometimes, change doesn't crash like a wave. Sometimes, it seeps in quietly, like water through the seams of an old boat. And by the time you notice, you're already drifting towards something new. They said a man couldn't change. That once you got crusted over by time and tide, there was no scraping it off. But Walt McCrae was proving that maybe, just maybe, they were wrong. Though he'd never admit it. Every morning now, before the sun had even peeked over the harbor, Walt was already at the bridge. He'd grumble to himself the entire walk, muttering curses about how this wasn't supposed to be a zoo and how people should mind their own damn business. But somehow, there was always fresh fish diced just right. And the crate beneath the bridge was always dry, lined with folded towels that didn't look like they'd come from his boat. Bowie had started to perk up. The infection in his eye cleared. His coat grew thick and glossy again. He learned to trust the old man's presence, enough to curl up beside his boot while he worked. And Walt? Well, he started to talk. Not to people, of course. To the Otter. "Walt, you're just like the rest of them," he'd say, sitting on an overturned bucket. "Always wanting something, and I'm the fool who gives it." But then he'd toss another sardine into Bowie's crate, and when the little thing squeaked in thanks, Walt looked away, too proud to admit it made him feel something. Of course, peace like that doesn't last in a town that small. By the third week, kids were showing up daily. Some came with binoculars, some brought sketchbooks. One even left a little handmade sign by the dock, "Otter crossing, please don't scare him." Walt tore it down, grumbling the whole time, but he didn't throw it away. He tucked it behind his tool chest instead. Then the adults started coming. A local reporter asked for an interview. The aquarium in Portland called twice. The town council sent a letter, politely requesting that Walt consider relocating the animal to an authorized marine facility for safety. Walt didn't reply. But the next day he posted a sign of his own, "Private property, no trespassing, no talking to me." That was the day Mrs. Ellen Dreyer showed up, a retired librarian with a voice soft as fog and a history with Walt that no one quite understood. She brought a thermos of tea and sat on the edge of the dock without asking. "You were never much for company, but you were never cruel," she said. She looked toward the bridge where Bowie was swimming lazy circles in the shallows, then back at Walt. "Ellen Dreyer, you're not just feeding that otter. You're feeding a part of yourself you thought was dead." That got under his skin. He stood up sharply, fists clenched, eyes burning with something older than anger. "Walt, I didn't ask for this. I didn't choose him. Ellen Dreyer. No, but maybe he chose you." That night, the town council voted again. This time they passed a motion. If the otter wasn't turned over by week's end, animal control would intervene. The news hit Walt like a rogue wave. He didn't yell, didn't argue. He just walked home, poured himself a drink, and stared at the old photo on his wall. His son, 15, grinning in a yellow life jacket, holding up his first catch. Walt's son, VO. "One day, I'm gonna study marine biology, Dad. Maybe even work with sea otters." That was the boy's dream. Before the accident, before the storm, before the silence. Walt never spoke of it. Not to neighbors, not to Ellen, not even to himself. But now, here he was, with a sea otter under his care, and a grief that wouldn't stay buried. He sat under the bridge that night, lantern flickering beside him. Bowie slept curled against his boot, warm and trusting. Walt looked out over the dark bay, voice just above a whisper. "Walt, Vio, I couldn't save you, kid, but maybe I can get this one right." That was the first time he said it out loud. The truth. And like all truths, it didn't fix everything. But it cracked something open inside him. The town was watching. The clock was ticking. And Walt McCrae, grizzled, stubborn, and alone, was about to learn that love, once awakened, refuses to be caged, even if the rest of the world wants it contained. It rained hard that Thursday. One of those Pacific storms that rolls in like judgment. Sheets of water pounding the bay, bending trees sideways, erasing the horizon in a curtain of gray. Most folks stayed in. Fishermen tied down their boats. Shops closed early. Windows flickered with candlelight and emergency radios. But Walt McCrae was out in it. Because storms don't care about town council deadlines. And Bowie was still under the bridge. Walt's coat was soaked through before he reached the landing. His flashlight beam jumped and sputtered, barely cutting through the sideways rain. But his hands moved fast. Faster than they had in years. The Otter's crate had tipped. Water surged through the bridge supports like a living thing, and in the corner of the flooded shelter, Bowie clung to a pile of tangled towels, shivering, squeaking, helpless again. Walt muttered under his breath, "Damn it! Hang on, you little fool." He slipped, cursed, and grabbed the edge of the crate, dragging it backward. Water soaked his boots, soaked his gloves, but he didn't care. Not this time. He scooped up Bowie with both arms, tucking the pup inside his coat. The Otter didn't resist, didn't fight, just lay there, pressed against the man's chest, trusting him completely. And maybe that was the part that cracked him wide open. By the time Walt got back to his shack, he was shaking. Not from the cold. He stoked the stove until the place glowed red-orange. Toweled off Bowie, dried his own hands, sat down with a blanket and didn't say a word. Just breathed. Just listened. Just held on. Something shifted in him that night. Something he'd kept locked away for 15 long years. Grief, yes, but more than that. A guilt so heavy it had bent his back. A question he'd never answered. Why did I live? And he didn't. That question had followed him into every sunrise. It haunted the bridge, haunted the boat, haunted every meal eaten alone. And now, somehow, in the flick of a whisker and the wet curl of an otter's paw, he felt it begin to lose its grip. The next morning he called Ellen Dreyer, asked her for help. She didn't gloat, didn't preach, just showed up with supplies. Formula, blankets, a heating pad. Walt didn't know what to say, so he just said thank you. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He opened the gate, not just to Ellen, to the kids, to the neighbors. He let them come, let them watch. Some even helped feed the pup, sketch his little face, bring pieces of driftwood to keep him entertained. Walt didn't like the noise. But he didn't turn them away, and that mattered more than he knew. Later that week, he found himself at the town library of all places, asking about marine biology books. He learned otters hold hands when they sleep so they don't drift apart. He learned about kelp forests, oil spills, conservation efforts, things his son had once rambled about over fish dinners, back when Walt had barely listened. Now he read every word, because now it mattered. One night, Walt sat outside watching Bowie nap in a small kiddie pool someone had donated. He sipped his tea, stared at the stars. You know, he would have liked you. That boy of mine. There was no answer, of course. Just the rhythmic sound of the waves. And the soft whistle of a creature who no longer felt lost. And for the first time in a very long time, Walt didn't feel lost either. This was more than a rescue, it was a reckoning. And the man who once said he didn't care was starting to wonder if he'd been wrong all along. Because sometimes, the thing that saves you is the one you never meant to save. By November, the story had spread beyond Newport. A reporter from Portland had come down, snapped a photo of Walt and Bowie, the old man half scowling, the otter balanced on a crate like royalty. The headline read, "The Bridge Keeper and His Otter, a Tale of Unexpected Kinship." People loved it. It went local viral, then regional. Soon, news vans started appearing at the edge of the dock, their antennas reaching like curious fingers into Walt's quiet corner of the world. He hated it, but he didn't shut it down, because something in him had shifted too far to go back. He started waking up with purpose, feeding, measuring, noting Bowie's habits like it mattered, because it did matter now. He wasn't just keeping something alive, he was learning, reaching, rebuilding. But the town didn't all feel the same. Some folks were proud, saw Walt as a symbol of renewal. Others whispered he was hogging the spotlight, or worse, putting the animal in danger. One morning, a letter arrived, nailed to the door of his shack. "You've had your time. The Otter belongs to the people. Or better yet, to the sea. Stop pretending you're a sanctuary." It was unsigned. Walt didn't show it to anyone, just folded it twice and slid it into a drawer beside an old photograph of his son. The pressure mounted. The town council called for another meeting. This time, it wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum. Either you turn over the Otter to Oregon wildlife by Sunday, or we do it for you. The room fell silent after they read the motion aloud. Walt stood in the back, arms crossed, jaw set like concrete. He's not a souvenir, and he sure as hell isn't property. They told him he was being sentimental, unreasonable, that wild animals weren't meant to be pets or symbols or personal therapy. And Walt said nothing else, just walked out. The next day, Bowie didn't eat. He lay still, curled tighter than usual. Walt noticed something off. A slight wheeze, a faint wince. He panicked quietly. Called Ellen, called the vet. Held Bowie through the night like a grandfather cradling a newborn. They said it might be stress, or weather, or maybe the Otter could sense what Walt already knew. The moment of peace was ending. On Saturday, Walt did something no one expected. He showed up at the school auditorium uninvited. There was a town meeting, updates on harbor repairs, upcoming elections. He waited in the back, hat in hand. When the microphone opened for public comment, he stepped forward. "Walt, I know most of you don't think I'm the right man for this," he began. "Hell, 10 years ago I probably would have agreed with you." He looked out over the room. Familiar faces, former friends, people he once yelled at for parking too close to his boat. "I ain't gonna lie, I didn't want that Otter, but he showed up anyway, like some kind of second chance I didn't ask for. I lost my boy 15 years ago, drowned in this bay. I've been drifting ever since. But then, this little creature shows up and suddenly I'm waking up for something again." He paused. "You can call it selfish. Maybe it is. But don't tell me it ain't real." The room was still. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just breath. "You want to take him?" Walt finished, voice steady. "Then come down to the dock tomorrow. But you'll have to carry him out of my arms yourself." And with that he left. That night, Walt sat by the crate again. Bowie was resting better, but Walt couldn't. He thought of all the things he hadn't said to his son. All the things he'd buried under silence and salt. "You remember that dream you had?" he whispered to the stars. "Working with otters, saving the sea." He looked down at the sleeping pup. "Well, maybe this is my way of finishing it for you." Sunday morning was coming, and with it, a choice. One that would test not just Walt's resolve, but the town's heart. Because some creatures don't just belong to the sea. Some belong to stories, to second chances, to people who've forgotten how to hope. And by the next tide, the town would have to decide what kind of story they wanted to be part of. Sunday morning came quiet and cold. The kind of coastal morning where fog rolls in like memory. Soft, slow, inescapable. Walt was already up. He stood at the edge of the dock in his old Navy peacoat, a thermos in one hand, Bowie wrapped gently in the other. The pup had gotten stronger again, eating, swimming, squeaking when fed. But Walt's hands trembled, not from the cold, from the weight of what might come next. He didn't know if the town would show, didn't know if they'd send someone official, or worse, someone indifferent. But he stood anyway. Because sometimes doing the right thing doesn't mean you win. It just means you stand your ground. Then, just past 8, a figure appeared through the fog. Not a wildlife officer, not a councilman, not even a reporter. It was a man about 35, clean jacket, city posture, but with eyes that looked like they'd known wind and work. He held a folder under one arm. "Connor, Mr. McRae?" Walt nodded cautiously. "Connor, name's Connor Hall, from the Oregon Marine Wildlife Education Fund." Walt bristled, ready to argue, to protect, to fight if he had to. But then the man said something that stopped him cold. "Connor, I knew your son," Connor explained. Back in high school, he and Walt's son, Michael, had shared science class, built tide pool models together, spent hours at the library looking up otter rescue stats and kelp regeneration. Connor had gone on to become a conservation educator. Michael, of course, hadn't gotten that chance. But Connor hadn't forgotten. And when he read the article, saw the photo of the old man and the otter beneath the bridge, he knew. He just knew it had to be Michael's father. Walt looked away, eyes wet, voice stuck behind years of grief. "Walt, I wasn't always kind," he admitted. "Connor." Connor nodded. "You were a father. He loved you, Walt, even when you didn't know how to say it back." Connor. Then Connor opened the folder. Inside, a proposal. "We'd like to make Bowie the mascot of our coastal conservation program," he said. "Not in a tank, not locked away, but right here. Monitored, free, part of the story. We'll build signage, clean up the bridge area, fund educational field trips. Tell your story, his story, so more people understand what we're trying to save." Walt stood still for a long time. "Walt, not just a mascot," he said at last. "A memorial. To the boy who didn't get to finish what he started." Connor smiled. "Exactly." By mid-morning, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, students, old friends who hadn't seen Walt in years. Instead of confrontation, there were folding chairs, thermoses of coffee, a banner that read, "Welcome to Bowie's Bay, a living story of rescue and return." Walt didn't speak much. He didn't need to. He simply stood by the water, Bowie nestled beside him on a towel, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. He felt connected to his son, to the town, to a purpose bigger than pain. And so the twist wasn't a fight. It wasn't a taking. It was an offering. From a past that refused to be buried, to a future that might still be saved. All because of one tangled little creature beneath a bridge who pulled a man back from the deep. In the weeks that followed, something rare happened in Newport. The space beneath the bridge, once ignored and forgotten, became a place of gathering, where fishermen paused on their way out to sea, where school kids came to learn, where tourists took photos, not of a landmark, but of a legacy. And at the center of it all stood Walt McCrae. He didn't say much at first, still wore that same battered coat, still scowled at noisy dogs and spilled coffee. But something in his eyes had changed, a gentleness beneath the gruffness. A man returned to his own skin. Older, yes, but no longer lost. Bowie became more than a curiosity. He became a story passed from parent to child. A reminder that even small lives can make big waves. And the plaque mounted at the edge of the dock read, "In memory of Michael McRae, for the ones we couldn't save, and the ones who saved us instead." One late afternoon, just as winter began creeping in again, Walt stood by the water, hands buried deep in his coat, watching Bowie dive and twirl in the shallows. The otter had grown strong now, sleek, confident, a master of his little kingdom. And Walt, watching him, smiled. Not the awkward twitch of lips he used to fake for cameras, but a real, quiet smile. The kind that reaches the eyes, the kind you earn. Ellen joined him with 2 cups of coffee. They stood side by side in companionable silence. "He'll go one day," she said gently. "Out to sea, where he belongs." Walt nodded slowly. "I know. That's the point, isn't it?" He didn't need to hold on anymore. Not to pain, not to regret, not even to the otter. Because what Bowie had given him could never be taken away. In time, Walt began sharing more. Stories about the bay, about his son, about the mistakes he made and the things he'd learned far too late. People listened. And somehow in those conversations, over paper cups and sea breeze, he became more than just a man with a past. He became a man with something to offer. They say healing doesn't happen all at once. It arrives in small waves. It shows up wet and tangled, needing help. And sometimes you don't recognize it until you're already changed. That's what happened beneath the bridge. Not a miracle, not magic, just two creatures who needed each other, one to survive and one to begin again. If you've ever been saved by something unexpected, something small, fragile, and full of life, maybe you know how Walt felt. And if not, maybe one day you will. Because redemption isn't loud, it's quiet. And it waits, just like the tide, for the moment you're ready to let it in. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched something in you, leave a comment below. Tell us your moment of change. And if you believe in second chances, for animals, for people, for yourself, like and subscribe for more stories like this one. Until next time, may your tide bring you exactly what you didn't know you needed.